If you call every silence a loss of interest, you may be strangling good connections with your own panic. Most women never get rejected by his quiet first. They get rejected by what their fear does next. Because sometimes a man goes quiet not when he feels nothing, but exactly when he feels too much. That is the hidden mechanic almost nobody explains correctly, and it changes how you read masculine withdrawal completely. I am giving you 7 reasons, and each one strips away a comforting lie you may still believe. Stay with me, because the last reason will force you to rethink what male attachment sounds like. And no, it does not always sound like pursuit, reassurance, or beautiful words delivered on schedule. First reason, he is not pulling away from you. He is retreating into himself after intensity hits. So slower replies after a powerful night do not automatically mean desire died somewhere between midnight and lunchtime. That if he wanted to, he would text exactly the same is often female logic misapplied. Here is the part most women miss. Regulation does not always look warm, expressive, or romantically legible. After intense emotional or physical contact, the nervous system often shifts from engagement into processing and stabilization. People less practiced at verbalizing feelings frequently metabolize emotional overload through distance instead of immediate conversation. So what looks like cooling off can actually be his clumsy attempt to keep from short-circuiting. Picture it clearly. You talked until 2. His eyes softened. Your bodies relaxed. And something undeniably real opened. The next day, instead of paragraphs, you get a flat message saying, "Work exploded," and he will text later. Your brain does what anxious brains do best. It writes a tragedy before the evidence even arrives. But on the surface, this looks like indifference, while underneath it may be simple emotional decompression. So do not interrogate him in the first 24 to 48 hours. And do not disappear theatrically either. Send one warm, pressure-free signal, then watch the pattern over time instead of worshiping one strange day. Because the next truth is even more uncomfortable. Sometimes he quiets down precisely when he realizes this is serious. Second reason, his silence is not always doubt about you. Sometimes it is shock from reality finally landing. Women often read hesitation as rejection because certainty feels romantic, while deliberation feels insulting, cold, and personally humiliating. But significance often enters a man's body before commitment enters his language, and that gap creates dangerous misunderstandings. He is not always backing away from your value. Sometimes he is staring at the size of change. Chemistry is easy to enjoy when it lives inside a night, a kiss, a fantasy, or momentum. It gets heavier when his mind starts calculating compatibility, time, money, emotional labor, expectations, and freedom all together. And here is where many women quietly sabotage themselves. They treat his internal seriousness like an ego wound. The brain does something brutally unromantic after an euphoric phase. It shifts from dopamine chase into risk assessment. That means ambivalence is not automatically refusal, but often a cognitive audit of long-term cost and meaning. He starts asking questions he never asked during the high. Can I sustain this? Fit this? Protect this? Can I be enough for her life, her standards, her emotional depth, without losing myself in process? So after several electric dates, he may suddenly seem less impulsive, almost like he is counting something invisible. You feel the drop in spontaneity and assume attraction cooled, when actually consequence just entered the room. If you have ever thought, "I ruined everything," stay with this, because your next reaction may deepen his silence. Do not demand certainty at the exact moment he has just felt the weight of what this connection could become. that pressure does not create clarity. It often makes him associate you with urgency, evaluation, and impending failure. Better to watch whether he returns after the pause with greater steadiness, specificity, and cleaner emotional presence. A healthy pause reorganizes him, while a real retreat dissolves initiative, consistency, and future-oriented behavior over time. So yes, your fear is understandable, but turning his processing into a referendum on your worth creates chaos. Sometimes you are not reacting to his rejection at all. You are reacting to your wounded pride. And the next paradox cuts deeper still. The more important you become, the more he may fear failing you. Third reason, he is not disappearing from indifference. He may be disappearing from fear of being found insufficient. Counterintuitively, strong interest does not always make a man move faster. Sometimes it makes him quieter and careful. Women love the myth that real desire always looks decisive, fluent, and unwavering under pressure from beginning. But significance can activate shame faster than confidence, especially when attraction suddenly becomes a test of character. He stops asking whether he wants you and starts asking whether he can actually sustain you. And that shift is where many good connections get mislabeled as emotional unavailability before the real mechanism appears. So, yes, he may like you more now, and that may be exactly why his rhythm changes. Once closeness turns real, some men feel evaluated not for spark, but for steadiness, provision, maturity, and follow-through. Status threat and expectation pressure can trigger a stress response where avoidance protects against anticipated shame, not disinterest. In psychology, anticipatory shame means withdrawing before exposure, because failing privately feels safer than disappointing someone meaningful directly. So the silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is self-measurement under invisible fluorescent lights inside him. Before intimacy, he was playful, bold, improvising, living inside chemistry without hearing the future knocking behind it. Afterward, he may start calculating time, money, emotional bandwidth, consistency, and whether his life can hold depth. And if you have ever called that emotional distance, you may have misnamed a man panicking privately. Picture him after an incredible night, suddenly auditing himself beside you like a candidate facing an unwritten exam. He wonders whether your standards are higher than his current life, whether your softness will become disappointment later. That is why your job here is reducing the atmosphere of hidden testing, not increasing it unconsciously. Communicate warmth without the subtext of prove it, and judge less by volume than by the quality. If he returns clearer, steadier, and more honest, fear was likely involved. If initiative dies, intention probably was. And if this is resonating, stay with the next part, because it may save you months of confusion. Because now we enter the uncomfortable zone where your most understandable reactions can quietly stretch his silence longer. Fourth reason, your anxiety may be extending his silence far more than his silence ever started by itself. The brutal twist is this: the real distancing often begins when your fear starts trying to manage uncertainty. You tell yourself you are simply clarifying, staying honest, now protecting the connection from confusion before it slips away. But many men do not experience that sequence as care. They experience it as rising interpersonal surveillance. And here is where most women accidentally wound themselves. Panic disguises itself as communication while quietly becoming pressure. So the issue is not that you wanted reassurance, but that urgency leaked through every supposedly casual interaction. Once that happens, he is no longer responding only to connection. He is responding to the fear surrounding it. That is why texts like "you okay?", "everything good?" or "just feels like you changed" rarely land neutrally. Add a sharper tone, a delayed reply, a little sarcasm, or sudden coolness, and the atmosphere hardens quickly. You think you are naming the tension, but he often hears a test he is already failing. Attachment research shows anxious activation in one partner frequently triggers defensive distancing in the other almost automatically. The chase-withdraw cycle feeds itself because pursuit amplifies pressure, and pressure makes retreat feel emotionally safer than explanation. So he reads not devotion, but a field where one wrong word will deepen the problem instantly. And if you have done this before, do not shame yourself. You are trying to survive uncertainty. Picture the sequence honestly. One short delay becomes 3 check-in messages, then a colder tone masquerading as self-respect. He feels the room narrowing, not because you are cruel, but because he can no longer arrive imperfectly. The medicine is simple, though not easy. Send one clear, warm signal, then return to your rhythm. If clarity is needed, ask for it calmly later, and not while your nervous system is demanding immediate relief. That one change protects your dignity and reveals whether he was processing or simply fading without intention. And if this matters to you, stay close, because the next paradox is even more unsettling. Sometimes even a healthy man steps back not from you, but to check whether closeness is swallowing him. 5th reason, distance can be a test of autonomy, not a test of your value, and that distinction changes everything. Counterintuitively, a short pullback after intense closeness can signal self-protection from engulfment, not unseriousness or emotional games. Here is where many women injure themselves quietly. They interpret his recoil as humiliation, then react from bruised worth. But not every inconsistency is manipulative instability. Sometimes it is an internal freedom check triggered by unexpected emotional depth. The paradox is brutal. The more powerfully he feels drawn in, the more urgently psyche may demand space, not because you became less important, but because importance can feel like gravity before it feels like home. And if you misread that moment, you start fighting for reassurance when the real issue is his relationship with autonomy. Attachment does not activate alone. Self-preservation activates beside it, and that combination creates confusing behavior after very strong closeness. When someone senses possible loss of control, the mind often increases psychological distance to restore internal coherence temporarily. So no, distance is not automatically proof he is playing, calculating, or shopping for better options elsewhere. Sometimes he is checking whether he still belongs to himself, while belonging begins to form with you. Picture several saturated days together. Then suddenly he disappears deeper into work, friends, errands, routines, and obligations. You feel downgraded, but he may simply be reaching for familiar structures that remind him he still stands. And if this stings, stay with it, because the mistake women make here is subtle and devastating. Do not compete with his need for autonomy by becoming louder, colder, more impressive, or more emotionally expensive to lose. That strategy turns his internal recalibration into a battlefield, and then you call the resulting distance proof. Better to give space without self-abandonment than watch whether he returns voluntarily, warmer, clearer, and more intentional. That is the difference between a man regulating freedom and a man slowly exiting without courage. You may have mistaken his private test of inner liberty for a public verdict on your desirability. If this lands, hold on, because the next layer is stranger. He may feel closeness deeper bodily, and near the end, you will see why male attachment sometimes goes silent precisely when words cannot carry it. 6th reason, he may feel deeply and still have no inner language strong enough to carry it toward you. What looks like coldness after closeness can be overloaded wordlessness, and women punish it before understanding what happened. That is where you may have hurt yourself quietly, by judging expression style instead of emotional substance underneath. Because here is the counterintuitive part. Some men do not narrate intensity. They somatize it and disappear. They feel it as tension, insomnia, restlessness, appetite shifts, mental static, and a strange need for distance. So no, if he felt something serious, he would not always know how to say it cleanly. And if you miss this, you answer his confusion with frost, then call the wreckage proof. A lot of men were trained to recognize action, not emotion, sensation, not meaning, pressure, not tenderness itself. So when something powerful happens, their internal world fills fast, but their vocabulary arrives late and fragmented. Psychology calls part of this lower emotional granularity, feeling many distinct states without naming them precisely enough. And when people cannot label inner experience, they often regulate by withdrawal, because language no longer organizes overwhelm. Unpicture the night after extraordinary closeness. Instead of becoming sweeter, he goes dim, distracted, oddly hard to read. You take the dimming as evidence the moment meant less, while inside him, it may mean too much. If this matters to you, stay until the end, because next we leave psychology and enter biology. So do not answer his imperfect expression with punishment, sarcasm, strategic silence, or a sudden performance of detachment. Give him a format where closeness does not require flawless articulation. Simple messages, warmth, and room to arrive clumsily. Something like, "Hope your day is heavy in work, not in your head," can hold more safety. That kind of signal tells him he does not need perfect language to remain connected, only honest movement. Otherwise, you may keep confirming his private fear that with you, imperfection becomes danger and exposure becomes expensive. And now, we reach the part almost nobody explains correctly, the reason promised from the beginning. Because the next truth shifts masculine silence from psychology into biology, and suddenly his quiet becomes disturbingly legible. Seventh reason, his silence may be vulnerability wearing a mask, triggered not by distance, but by attachment itself forming. Here is the deepest inversion. He may go quiet not when you mean nothing, but when you matter dangerously. Most women still believe real attachment should immediately look warmer, louder, clearer, and more consistently emotionally available afterward. But for many men, depth first registers as exposure, and exposure does not always move toward language gracefully. Sometimes it moves backward one step, not from indifference, but from an organism trying not to fracture. And if you called that retreat proof of low feeling, you may have mistaken destabilization for detachment completely. That mistake matters, because now we are no longer reading behavior alone. We are reading a body under attachment stress. Once closeness crosses a threshold, attachment systems activate alongside stress chemistry, hormonal shifts, and fear of losing autonomous control. Oxytocin, dopamine recalibration, and post-intimacy vulnerability can make connection feel less like pleasure and more like consequence. So his nervous system may interpret this bond as something that can alter him, bind him, hurt him. On the surface, he just got quieter, less fluent, slower, harder to read, and suddenly less romantically reassuring. Underneath, his body may already know this connection is no longer casual, even if his words still lag. That is why some men step back precisely when attachment deepens. Distance becomes a primitive method of self-regulation. He is not always choosing against you there. Sometimes he is trying not to drown in what you awakened. So do not romanticize every silence, but do not label every silence rejection either, because both distort reality. The mature position is colder and kinder at once. Watch the pattern, the return, the post-pause contact. Does he come back with presence, accountability, warmth, and renewed capacity, or only with crumbs and vagueness? That distinction protects your dignity without forcing you to amputate meaning from every temporary pause too early. You do not need to chase silence, decode yourself into exhaustion, or collapse your worth around his regulation. A grown woman learns to see where there is avoidance and where there is attachment still unnamed. Sometimes a man goes quiet not because you mean nothing to him, but because you already mean more than he can easily bear.